My father cleared his throat, the way he always did, before he said something he'd already decided wasn't up for discussion. Marcus is taking over the Delacroix house. Full ownership. We signed the papers Tuesday. I set my fork down slow, like if I moved too fast, the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Signed what papers? The deed transfer, Naomi. My mother, Patrice, said it like I was the one being difficult. Your father and I talked about it for months. Months. They'd talked about it for months, and I found out over red beans and rice on a random Sunday in October. 9 years. 9 years. After I'd walked away from a corporate hospitality job in Houston to come run operations at the hotel my grandfather built with his own 2 hands. Marcus wouldn't even look at me. He studied his glass of sweet tea like it owed him money. Before we continue, please hit that like button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. Now let's continue. I'm the vice president of operations, I said, and I kept my voice level, because I'd learned a long time ago in that family that the moment you raised your voice, you became the problem. I rebuilt the reservation system. I kept 82 rooms staffed through a pandemic when we lost 40% of our bookings in 11 weeks. I put $40,000 of my own savings into payroll in April of 2020, so nobody on housekeeping had to file for unemployment. $40,000, Daddy. And we appreciate that, my father said, in the same tone you'd use to thank a caterer. Appreciate it how? With a title? A bonus? Because it sounds like you appreciated it by giving my brother the deed to a $14 million hotel he's never worked a full shift at in his life. Marcus finally looked up. That's not fair. Fair? I repeated. I almost laughed. Marcus, you were 3 hours late to the investor walkthrough in March because you were at the boat show. Naomi, my mother's voice sharpened into that register she used when she wanted a conversation to be over. This is a family decision. It's done. I looked around that table, my father's reading glasses pushed up on his head, my mother's pearl earrings catching the chandelier light, my brother refusing to meet my eyes, and something in me went very, very quiet. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I said, "Excuse me," folded my napkin, and walked out to my car. I sat in the parking lot of the house I grew up visiting on holidays, and I did not start the engine for 11 minutes. I just sat there, staring at the porch light, thinking about every year I'd given that hotel that nobody was going to give back. To understand what that hotel meant, you have to understand where it came from. In 1968, my grandfather, Solomon Delacroix, was a 26-year-old Pullman porter with a wife, a newborn, and $400 in savings. He and my grandmother, Odessa, bought a run-down boarding house on Dry 80th Street in New Orleans. 6 rooms, no air conditioning, a leaking roof, because black travelers couldn't get a room at most hotels downtown. Not officially, not comfortably, not without trouble. Solomon did the books, the plumbing, the roof repairs. Odessa did everything else. She ran the front desk 16 hours a day. She cooked breakfast for every guest by hand. She kept a ledger of regulars in her own handwriting, musicians passing through for gigs on Bourbon Street, families visiting relatives, salesmen who couldn't get a room anywhere else in the city. By 1975, they'd expanded to 18 rooms. By 1990, the Delacroix house had 82 rooms, a restaurant, a courtyard wedding venue, and a reputation as one of the finest black-owned hotels in the American South. Here's the part nobody in my family likes to say out loud at dinner. The deed only ever had Solomon's name on it. Odessa built that hotel with her hands and her mind and her whole life. And when the papers were drawn up, it went to her husband, because that's simply how it was done. She used to tell me that story when I was 9 years old, sitting on a step stool behind the front desk while she showed me how to check a guest in. "They'll try to write you out of your own work, baby," she told me once. "Doesn't matter how much sweat you put in the walls." Somebody'll always try to hand it to whoever they think it's supposed to go to. I didn't understand what she meant until I was 31 years old, sitting in a parking lot, replaying the sound of my father saying it's done. I want to be fair to my brother, because this story is not as simple as golden child versus hard worker, even though that's exactly what it looked like from where I sat. Marcus was 2 years younger than me, funnier than me, better with people at a party, worse with people who needed something from him at 9 in the morning. He'd bounced through 3 different business ventures by the time he was 28, a car detailing service, a streetwear line, a failed attempt at flipping houses that left him $30,000 in debt to a hard money lender named Reggie Broussard, a man my father knew from church and clearly still owed a favor to. I found that debt out later. At the time, all I knew was that Marcus showed up at the Delacroix house 2 years before the dinner that changed everything, given the title of Director of Guest Experience, a role that had never existed before he needed a job. I trained him. I want that on the record. I personally walked him through our booking software, our vendor contracts, our staff scheduling. I covered for him when he no-showed. I told myself I was being a good sister. At the hotel's 20th annual staff banquet, I was named Employee of the Year for the 3rd time. My mother stood up and clapped along with everyone else, and afterward, in the parking lot, she pulled me aside. "You know they only give you that plaque because you never say no to anything," she said. "Marcus has vision, Naomi. You have diligence." "Those aren't the same thing." I laughed, because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. "You'll always have a place here," she added, like that was supposed to comfort me. "A good place, don't you worry about that." I didn't understand, at the time, that a place and the deed were 2 very different promises. I found out the difference on a Sunday in October, over red beans and rice, and by then it was already signed. I didn't quit that night. I want to be clear about that, because everyone assumes I stormed out in a blaze of dramatic fury. I didn't. I went home, I made tea, and I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, and I made a list of every single thing I still needed to figure out before I could leave a job I'd given 9 years to. I called an employment attorney the next morning. Turned out I had no legal claim to ownership. I'd never been on paper, never been promised equity in writing, only in the soft language families use to keep you loyal without actually committing to anything. "You'll always have a place here" isn't a contract, it's a leash. I stopped arguing with my parents. I stopped bringing it up at family dinners. I smiled, I clocked in, I trained Marcus on vendor renewals, and every single night I went home and worked on something they didn't know about. 3 years earlier, at a hospitality conference in Atlanta, I'd met a man named Reginald Voss, 61 years old, owned a string of boutique properties across the Southeast, sharp as a tack, blunt as a hammer. We'd stayed in touch. He used to tell me, "Naomi, when you're ready to stop building somebody else's dream, call me first." I'd always laughed it off. I called him on a Wednesday in November, 5 weeks after that dinner. "I'm ready," I said. Reggie didn't ask me to explain. He just said, "Good, come to Charlotte Friday." I gave my 2 weeks' notice on a Thursday. Quiet, professional, no scene. My mother read the letter and said, "You'll regret this." My father didn't say anything at all. Marcus texted me, "This is dramatic. You know that, right?" On my last day, I cleaned out my office, left my key card and my keys on the front desk counter, the same counter Odessa Delacroix had stood behind for 40 years, and I walked out without telling a single soul where I was going. Nobody called to ask. I moved to Charlotte with $11,000 in savings, a signed letter of intent from Reginald Voss to co-invest in my first property, and a business plan I'd rewritten 4 times. The first hotel, a 19-room boutique property in a converted textile mill, opened 14 months later under the name The Odessa. I named it after my grandmother, on purpose, loudly, on every piece of signage and every press release. If nobody was going to say her name at family dinners, I was going to put it on a building. It was not glamorous. I slept in the manager's office for the first 6 weeks because I couldn't yet afford both payroll and my own apartment. I answered guest complaint emails at 2 in the morning. I learned, the hard way, what my grandmother had learned decades before me, that building something from nothing takes a kind of exhaustion nobody warns you about. But it worked. Occupancy hit 91% in our second quarter. A regional travel writer called it the most thoughtfully designed boutique property in the Carolinas. By year 2, Reggie and I opened a second Odessa in Nashville, then a third in Houston. I didn't call home, not once. Not for my birthday, not for Thanksgiving, not when my mother's sister passed away, and I only found out because a cousin texted me a photo from the funeral. People assume silence is anger. Sometimes silence is just the only language left that doesn't cost you anything. I heard things secondhand, the way you do in families like mine, where news travels through aunts and cousins instead of phone calls. I heard Marcus had renovated the lobby. I heard the restaurant changed vendors twice. I heard, faintly, something about the bank. I didn't ask questions. I opened a fourth Odessa in Savannah. 2 years and 4 months after I walked out, my phone rang at 6:40 in the morning, and it was Marcus. I let it go to voicemail. He called again 9 minutes later. Then, a text. "Naomi, I need to talk to you. It's serious. Please." I sat on the edge of my bed in my Nashville apartment, staring at that message for a long time, and I thought about my grandmother's voice. "They'll try to write you out of your own work." I thought about how convenient it was that serious only ever seemed to happen when they needed something from me, and never when I needed something from them. I called him back that afternoon, mostly out of curiosity. "The hotel's in trouble," he said. "No hello, no how have you been." "The bank's calling the loan. Dad remortgaged 2 years ago to cover a shortfall, and nobody told me the terms, and now we're 4 months behind, and—" "Marcus," I kept my voice flat. "Why are you calling me?" "Because you know how to run this stuff. You always did. I need you to come back and— I don't work there anymore. You could co-sign something. You could talk to the bank. You have relationships. I have relationships I built," I said. And for the first time in 2 years, I let some heat into my voice. After I left with nothing, after Mama told me I'd regret it and nobody called to check if I was even alive in a new city by myself. You want me to walk back into a building with my name nowhere on the deed and clean up a mess I warned you about for 9 years? Silence on the line. "I'm sorry," he finally said, quiet. "I really am. I didn't know it would get this bad." "I believe you didn't know," I said. "But I also know you never once asked why I left. Nobody did." I hung up. I sat there for a long time. Then I went downstairs and walked into the lobby of the Nashville Odessa, where a family from Detroit was checking in, laughing, and the front desk manager looked up and said, "Ms. Delacroix, the Savannah numbers just came in. We beat projections by 12%. I smiled and said, "Good. Let's talk expansion." I found out what happened next from Reginald Voss himself, 3 weeks later, sitting across from me at a diner outside Charlotte. "A man named Everett Delacroix called me," Reggie said, watching my face carefully. "Introduced himself as your father. Told me I should reconsider my partnership with you. Said you'd left the family business under, and I'm quoting him, unstable circumstances, and that you had a habit of overpromising and under-delivering." I set my coffee down very carefully. "He also called my banker in Nashville," Reggie continued. "Same story, different words. Tried to plant doubt before our 5th property financing closed." My father, a man who hadn't called me once in 2 years and 4 months, not for my birthday, not for a single holiday, had picked up the phone to try to sabotage the one thing I'd built entirely on my own, using nothing but his own two hands and a family name he'd never once let me put on paper. "What did you tell him?" I asked, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "I told him," Reggie said, "that I've watched you turn 19 rooms into 4 properties and 91% occupancy in 2 years, with your own money and your own back, and that in my 40 years in this business, I have never once seen a founder underdeliver the way you deliver." Then I told him to lose my number. I didn't cry. I'd promised myself, that first night in the parking lot, that I wasn't going to spend one more tear on people who'd never spent one on me. But I did feel something shift, past hurt, into something colder and clearer. Because sadness I could live with. But my own father actively trying to burn down the thing I'd built from ash, after handing my inheritance to a man who couldn't keep his own books straight, that wasn't a wound anymore. That was a declaration of war I hadn't asked for and fully intended to win. The full truth came out the way family truths usually do, sideways, through the one person who'd never been afraid to say it plain. My great-aunt Celeste, Odessa's youngest daughter, the family's black sheep for reasons nobody ever fully explained to me growing up, called me out of nowhere on a Tuesday. "I heard what your father's been doing," she said, "trying to whisper in your business partner's ear. I want you to know the real reason he handed that hotel to Marcus so fast." I sat down. "I'm listening." "Your father put a second mortgage on the Delacroix house back in 2018, quietly, without your mother's full knowledge at first, to cover a bad investment in a strip mall project that went under. He was drowning in debt on that property for years. When he finally told your mother, they panicked. Marcus had just come back into the picture, talking about his vision for expansion, and your father thought handing him the deed outright, fast, before you found out how bad the finances actually were, would let him quietly restructure the debt under a fresh owner without you asking the kind of hard questions you always asked. I felt something crack open in my chest. Not sympathy, not yet, but understanding. He didn't pick Marcus because Marcus was better, Celeste said. He picked Marcus because Marcus wouldn't ask to see the books. You would have. You always did. I thought about every year. I'd been told I was too intense, too focused on the numbers, not as easygoing as your brother. It had never been a flaw. It had been the exact reason I was dangerous to a plan built on hidden debt. Your grandmother would be proud of what you built, Celeste added, softer now. And she'd be furious at what they did to you. I watched them write her off that deed 60 years ago. I never thought I'd watch them try to do it to you too. For the first time since that dinner, I let myself cry. Not from weakness, from finally being seen. 10 months later, the Southern Hospitality Alliance held its annual awards gala in Atlanta, and the Odessa Collection, now 6 properties across 4 states, was nominated for Boutique Group of the Year. I wore green, my grandmother's favorite color. I didn't expect my parents to be in the room, but my father, it turned out, was there too, invited as a guest by an old colleague, sitting 3 tables away, watching the Delacroix house's competitor humiliate his own bloodline in real time, because the Delacroix house itself hadn't been nominated for anything in 4 years. When they called my name for the award, I walked up in front of 300 hospitality executives, and I did not thank my family. I thanked Reginald Voss. I thanked my Aunt Celeste. I thanked my staff, by name, all 41 of them across 6 cities. And I thanked my grandmother, Odessa Delacroix, who ran a front desk for 40 years and never once got her name on the deed she built with her own hands. This collection carries her name because somebody in this family finally should. The room applauded. My father did not. Afterward, in the lobby, my mother approached me alone, older than I remembered, tired. "The hotel's in foreclosure proceedings," she said. No preamble, like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. "Marcus is trying to sell before the bank takes it." We wanted to ask if you'd consider." "No," I said, gently but completely. "I'm not coming back to save it. But I'll tell you what I will do. I'll have my attorney reach out about purchasing the property directly from the bank, at fair market value, once foreclosure clears. Under my name, on my deed, run the way I choose to run it." My mother's eyes filled. "That's not what we hoped for." "I know," I said, "but it's what's fair, and fair is more than I was ever offered at that dinner table." 8 months after the gala, I signed the paperwork on the old Delacroix house myself. 82 rooms, the same courtyard where my grandparents held their 50th anniversary, the same front desk Odessa stood behind for 4 decades. I renamed it the Odessa House, flagship, and I hung a portrait of my grandmother in the lobby, where every guest checking in would see her face first. I offered Marcus a job, not ownership, a job, front desk operations, entry level, same as anybody else would start. He took it. Some weeks he shows up late, some weeks he doesn't. I don't cover for him anymore, and for the first time in his life, nobody does. He's had to learn what accountability without a safety net actually feels like, and slowly, quietly, he's getting better at it. My father and I speak maybe 4 times a year, careful, formal, healing at the pace it's willing to heal at, which is slower than either of us would like. My mother calls more often. She's never quite apologized outright. Some people never do. But she's started asking about the business instead of warning me away from it, and some days, that's enough. The Odessa collection has 9 properties now, spread across 5 states, 41,000 square feet larger than the entire footprint of the family's original holdings. Trade magazines call it one of the fastest-growing Black-owned hospitality groups in the Southeast. I call it what it actually is, proof that you can walk away from people who never valued you and build something bigger than the thing they wouldn't share. Some nights, I still think about that dinner table, the red beans and rice going cold, my father's voice saying it's done, my brother staring at his sweet tea instead of looking at me. I used to think that moment broke something in me. Now I understand it built something instead. My grandmother told me once that somebody would always try to write me out of my own work. She never told me what to do about it. I think she wanted me to figure that part out myself. Turns out, the answer was simple. You stop asking for the deed. You go build your own. Thank you for watching all the way through. If you enjoyed today's story, a quick like and a subscription would mean a lot. And don't forget to tell me in the comments what you think happened after the final scene. I'll see you in the next adventure.